You will own nothing and you will like it. Or at least that's what Canada's financial regulator seems to think. The Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, or OSFI for short, which is Canada's banking police basically, are changing up how banks have to deal with mortgages and lending on rental properties. These proposed changes are going to make it more difficult for mom and pop small-time investors to own rental properties. Now, I'm sure most of you are cheering on this change because everyone seems to think that landlords and real estate investors are evil and should be punished, but I'm here to tell you that this might not actually be such a good thing after all, even if you really, really hate landlords. So let's jump in and see what this proposed rule change actually means even for you, even if you don't own rental properties or a home at all. You might have heard of the term financialization of housing floating around. It's the idea that homes are no longer just places to live. They're assets to be traded, leveraged, and optimized, kind of like a stock portfolio. In this kind of a world, big real estate corporations, REITs, pension funds, they don't just own homes. They run them like businesses, because effectively that's what they are. And if you're not quite sure what I mean, think of BlackRock down in the United States. You know, that trillion-dollar company that really promises everybody that they're not evil? Yeah, those guys. So OSFI just dropped this proposed rule change that, honestly, on the surface, kind of seems boring. But it pours fuel on the fire that is the financialization of housing. The rule change basically says this: if you use income from a rental property for one mortgage, you can't count it again for another mortgage. So if you're a regular person who's trying to buy a rental property, maybe for retirement income or to pay off your mortgage faster or any other number of reasons, this will throw a bit of a wrench into your gears. Because before, a small-time landlord might have used rental income from multiple properties to build up their portfolio. Now, we're not talking big, huge portfolios here. We're talking about somebody who owns, 1, 2, maybe 3 properties. But with this new rule, OSFI says you can't double up, you can't double count that income, which will force banks to be more conservative when they're looking at lending on rental properties. So how does this affect the small-time investor? Well, if it's not as easy to leverage your properties, your buying power shrinks. You become riskier in the eyes of the bank, meaning you face higher interest charges, extra regulation, or frankly, them just refusing to lend to you altogether. You lose flexibility, especially compared to the big players in the rental space. And the weird thing is that this seems to be solving a problem that isn't really there. If they had an issue with people owning multiple properties, they would have just legislated a maximum number of properties that a single entity can own. But they didn't do that. And yes, right now foreclosures are going up a little bit, but there isn't any correlation between those foreclosures and people owning investment properties. So that begs the question, why is this even being done and who is to benefit? Well, cue big real estate corporations. Think of companies that own entire buildings. That's the scale that I'm talking about. These guys have big capital reserves, and they don't necessarily rely so much on income to qualify for new debt. They often have diverse income streams and healthy balance sheets. So rental income is a smaller piece of their overall financial profile. And these companies, they benefit from economies of scale, operational efficiency, and that kind of thing. And on top of that, they actually have access to financial markets that regular folks like you and I just don't have access to at all. So in short, these changes don't really seem to mean anything for these big players. And again, you might be sitting there thinking, well, who cares? Landlords are scum anyway, whatever. Why do I care about this? Well, this seems like legislative change that really disproportionately benefits the bigger players in the industry and punishes the small ones. And that doesn't sit right with me, especially when these changes don't actually help make housing in BC any more affordable, be it on the purchasing side or on the rental side. What it does do, though, is make it easier for those big players to buy up properties that other smaller investors just don't want to deal with anymore. So what are the actual consequences of all of this? Well, many people dislike landlords and they dislike real estate investors. They see them as greedy, and just look at any of the comments on any of my videos that mention anything to do with investors. They're basically negative across the board. Everybody hates them, seemingly. In fact, they might be the one group of people that's hated more than real estate agents. But Renting from a person often means that you can actually talk to them. You can negotiate with them. You can fix problems faster. Or you might even be able to get a little bit of leniency from them if life happens to get a little bit messy and you need a little bit of a break for a month. But if that individual is sidelined, well, what's going to replace them? Well, a corporation, one that has strict policies and spreadsheets and shareholders to keep happy. And when you run a rental from a spreadsheet, there's not going to be room for leniency anymore. So the big question is do you want to rent from someone or something? This change, along with a lot of the others in the rental space, is part of a growing trend that I mentioned earlier in the video. The financialization of housing. This means more real estate as an asset class and less housing as a home. And over time, changes like this means that rental properties are owned by fewer and fewer people. They're consolidated into the hands of these larger players. And that consolidation means less responsiveness to tenant needs, fewer personal relationships, and more of a focus on yield and vacancy control, and ultimately, profit margin. And don't get me wrong, small-time landlords aren't perfect by any means. We've all heard the bad landlord horror stories, but kind of like with plane crashes, you only ever really hear about the bad ones. We don't hear about the thousands of landlords throughout BC and across Canada that have great relationships with their tenants. The ones that provide a clean, safe place for people to live. And like it or not, the idea of people renting isn't going anywhere. There's no magic legislation that can be done that will suddenly make housing affordable enough for everyone to own their own home. So like I said before, this proposed rule change skews the rules against the small-time investor and benefits the big ones. And eventually, if you put enough of these rule changes together, you're eventually going to just push out the small-time investor altogether. And that's not by accident. It's by design. It means more power to big capitalized corporations and less to individuals. And even if some landlords are greedy or immoral or whatever, it's still better than, sorry, it's corporate policy, which is much, much worse. So when you read news like this or you hear stories like this, ask yourself the question, who really stands to benefit? Because it's not you and it's not me. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you rather rent from a small-time landlord or a big corporation? And you get bonus points if you share a good landlord story, since all we seem to hear about is the bad ones. Anyway, I'm Angelo with the Atlas Group. I'll see you in the next one.